or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. It's our 141st Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar after a couple of weeks break. It's good to see some photos and action shared from the Research in Economics Using Sports Data workshop in Vienna last week. But we're back this week and we have Matteo Picchio, Marche Polytechnic University, and he's presenting the impact of high temperatures on performance in work-related activities. Matteo, I haven't checked with you. Are you happy for people to ask you questions as we go along?
Yes, of course, no problem. Yep. You can interrupt me.
Perfect. Okay, Matteo, you've got the full hour and a half then, basically, and depending on how many questions you get to interrupt you, I'll try and give you about an hour in which to talk, so that we can have about half an hour for Q&A, and that's either all at the end or as we go along, depending on how many questions you get. But without any further delay, Matteo, please do take away your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm presenting a joint paper with Jan van Oors, who is among us. And this paper is about tennis, although the title maybe may suggest something more general than that. In this paper, we look at the impact of temperatures, high temperatures, on performance in tennis. The outline of my presentation is as follows. I will first of all tell you something about economic research on temperature, weather condition, climate change, giving you some examples also of previous economic studies who dealt with outcome variables like happiness, mental health, exam performance, work-related injuries, and many others. I will give you also some examples of previous studies in using sport data, especially about baseball and tennis. And finally, I will move to our study. Our study focuses on men playing outdoors. We will use ATP Tour matches from 2003 to 2021. And finally, I will conclude with the main conclusions, with the main takeaway from our study. You know that human beings have a thermal comfort zone. That's about 18-24 Celsius degree, about 64-75 Fahrenheit degrees. And if temperature is lower than that, it's not so difficult to cope with it, apart from very extreme temperature. It's just a matter of putting on more clothes. But if it's higher than that, and especially if you work outdoors, then basically you suffer. There is not so much that you can do apart reducing effort to cool down your body to avoid overheating. Indoors, you can have some kind of technology that may be of help, like air conditioning, simple fans that may help you to cool down. But outdoors, that's really a matter of sometimes of suffering. And if we think of how we are affected by high temperatures, we should consider that there is a variety of effects on our body from the physical point of view, but also from the mental point of view. When temperatures are quite high, we suffer of heat stress, body struggles to regulate its temperature, dehydration, heat-related issues, cardiovascular strains. We are affected by slower reactions. Memory may be impaired. We have reduced capability of solving problems and tasks. There are some sleep disturbances. I mean, there is different ways in which high temperatures may affect human body, and therefore also our productivity at work. And in the last 20 years, a new climate economy literature have been rising, which is summarized in this paper that I mentioned here, Dell et al., Journal of Economic Literature in 2014, where basically we realized that the basic challenge of identifying the impact of temperature on economic outcomes is quite difficult task, especially if we look at the long run. That's because cross-sectional correlation between climate and economics is not very informative, because most of the time you have that economic outcomes are correlated with weather conditions. Think of, I don't know, regions in the south and the economy in the south in many countries, like for instance Italy, but also many others, where you have at the same time that you have particular temperatures in the south, but also particular economic structure in the same regions. And therefore, this new empirical research has focused more and more on panel data and trying to identify the effect of temperature or weather condition in general by looking at short-term variations. But by doing so, we are only able to identify a short-term effect of temperature on the economic outcome of interest. And then the challenge is we are able to generalize the short-term effect and to interpret it as a climatic change effect. That's because in the long run, there may be, at the same time, intensification effects. So maybe the long run effect may be even bigger than the short run effect. Or if there is an adaptation, so because of technological change, or because our body can adapt to different weather conditions over time, maybe the effect in the long run is even smaller than the short-term ones. And there is evidence that temperature affect many economic outcomes, agricultural output, economic growth, political stability, productivity, health, conflict, crime, but also many others. And if we look at what happens nowadays with these rising temperatures, understanding how economic outcomes are affected by weather conditions, especially by temperatures, high temperatures, it's quite important in order to have policies and institutions that can be effective in order to cope with this kind of changing environmental situation in which we are. Now, just some few examples of what we can find in the economic literature about the impact of temperature on outcomes. This is a paper by Baylis, published on Journal of Public Economics. He studied the relationship between temperature and sentiment, happiness, if you wish, finding that you have this kind of inverted U-shaped relationship. And so when it becomes quite hot, sentiment decreases, so people are less happy. And the same is true when it's quite cold. Mullins and White, for the US, analyzed the impact of temperature on mental health, and they found that there is this kind of almost linear and increasing relationship between temperature and emergency department visits and suicides. And when they try to provide an explanation for this quite clear-cut impact of temperature on health, they argue that these effects that we see in the top graphs could come from minutes slept in the last night. So basically, we know that sleep quality matters a lot for our health, and this could exacerbate the negative effect of temperature on these health outcomes. Somebody studied also the impact of temperature on exam performance. Here I'm referring to a paper published on Journal of Human Resources by Park et al. That's a paper, once again, for the US. Here we can see the relationship between outdoor temperature and exam performance. And they conclude that actually temperature has a big effect, a sizable effect on the probability of passing a subject, and also on the duration that students take, basically the time until they are able to complete, to get a diploma. And here I'm referring to a paper about injury at work. I'm mainly a labor economist, so that's probably one of the most interesting results related to my research. It's the impact on injury at work. So the probability of suffering an accident at work, an injury at work. For the US, for Texas, Dillender found that you have this kind of increasing profile in the daily claim rates. And I also joined with Mattia, who is a former PhD student of mine, who is here among us today. We also studied this issue for Italy. And we found that also in Italy, that's a quite important issue, that temperature can exert quite relative impact on the daily injury rate. And we estimated that an increase by 2 Celsius degree on average can generate about almost 9,000 accidents in a year in Italy. But now let's move to sport. Let's start with this kind of long-run relationship between temperature and performance in baseball. Callahan et al. is a paper dealing with baseball, and they find that when temperature is higher, it's much easier to hit a home run. And they try to explain why it should be like that, and they realize that it's probably due to lower air density. So when it's hotter, the air density is lower, and therefore it's easier to hit a home run. And that's maybe one of the few examples in sport economics, or in sport, let's say more in general, where you find that temperature is able to increase performance, because typically we find that it's found in the literature that performance in sport is negatively affected by high temperatures, by extremely high temperatures. There is a paper by Smith et al. Dealing with tennis. That's for women. Just only 360 matches of 3 editions of the. Just give me a second to close my window because there is some work ahead. This paper is Smith et al. They deal with women, Australian Open, and they find that with higher temperature, the probability of having double fault rates increases, and forced error increases. So basically, a negative impact on performance, but also the way in which women play changes, because they observe that there are less net approaches. So meaning that probably women try to save energies to avoid overheating by going less to the net. A first serve aces and the speed of the serve is not affected. There is another paper, baseball, on the relation between temperature and the accuracy of umpire decisions. In this case, Professor Meyer found that temperature is also able to affect the capability of the umpire to take rightly his or her decisions. In this case, temperature decreases this capability, this kind of cognitive capability. And finally, the last paper that I'm mentioning today, just as examples, is this paper recently appeared as a working paper, MBR working paper by Marche et al. It appeared at the beginning of September. And this paper is very similar to what we are doing. They use similar data. They use a similar identification strategy for the causal effect, for the short-term effect of temperature on performance. And they find that injuries increase, double fault increases, and match duration is actually not affected by higher temperatures. Now, our paper. Our paper focuses on 2 dependent variables that we use as 2 tennis performance indicators. The first one is the first serve made rate, and the second one is the double fault rate. So the first one is the fraction of time a server is able to correctly serve in the opponent service box, independently on whether the server is able to win or not the point. The double fault rate is the fraction of time the fraction of points, the served points that the server loses because of a double fault. So basically, the player makes a mistake in the first serve and in the second serve. These two performance measures, actually, we use just these two performance measures because we weren't able to find other performance measures in tennis that are not affected by the interaction with the opponent. And this is quite important in order to identify the effect of temperature, because think of what we would have had if we have chosen something like aces. You have an ace in tennis if you serve if you win the point right from the serve without the opponent, without even touching the ball. If we use the number of aces, or like the rate at which the server is able to have an ace, then that metric would have been affected at the same time by the performance of the server, but also the performance of the opponent. And when temperature rises, both of them could be negatively affected. The server could serve not as well and not as accurate as when temperature is lower, but at the same time, the opponent is maybe less reactive. And if both of them go down, basically you may observe nothing in terms of number of aces or the fraction of times server is able to serve an ace. With these two performance measures that we use, we avoid this kind of problems coming from the interaction between the two players. And so our contribution is to basically estimate, identify, at least we hope to convince you that we credibly identify the causal effect of temperature on performance in tennis, which is in this kind of field the measure of labor and productivity. We focus and we provide information about the effect of temperature on productivity in terms, and we interacted with the importance of a match. So basically, we try to understand if the temperature gradient depends on what it is at stake. And then we dig further into the heterogeneity issue, and we try to understand if the effect depends on player characteristics like age and quality, or working environment. In this particular setup, working environment, we mean basically different surfaces: clay, hard, grass. The way in which players play in these different surfaces is different. Grass is typically the fastest court, where you have less loss of horizontal speed of the ball, and where the ball bounces less, so that typically rallies are shorter, and the duration also of each rally is much shorter, compared, for instance, to what happens when you play on clay, where the bounces are higher.
Togetherness and families. So there was
Sorry.
on our mind we would not only
there is someone with the microphone on.
Opportunity, and so far
I cannot hear you.
Yeah, I've muted.
Is there a question? Is there a question?
Oh, Sydney, was there a question?
No, I can hear someone speaking, but very loudly.
Yeah, no, they joined and then they hadn't muted their microphone, but I muted them.
Okay.
So
Sorry.
Carry on.
On clay, the loss of horizontal speed is quite important. Typical rallies is much longer, and the kind of energy that you have to put on that match is quite more important. So it might be, our guess is that on clay, if there is a negative effect temperature on performance, on clay could be much more important than on grass. And finally, we provide some evidence about heat adaptation or accumulation and long-run relation between temperature and performance in tennis. Some equations just to formalize a little bit what we have in mind, and also the relationship between our measures of performance and what really happens in a tennis match. First of all, let's define by P, let's denote by P the power of the serve, and by A the accuracy of the serve. And let's imagine that the serve performance depends both on the power and the accuracy. And let's imagine that we have this simple functional form, just the product of the power and the accuracy. And accuracy depends on the power. Typically, this kind of relationship is negative. The higher the power, the lower the accuracy. And let's assume that accuracy is normalized between 0 and 1, and that we can also interpret it as a probability of serving correctly the ball in the opponent service box. And now, what's the problem of the tennis player? The tennis player should decide power in order to maximize the probability or maximize the objective function, which is the serve performance. In tennis, you have a first serve. If you make a mistake, you have a second opportunity, the second serve. If you also miss the second serve, then you lose the point. So because of that, it's a kind of sequential game. So let's start by solving this problem by backward induction, by being in the second serve. And if we are in the second serve, the objective function is here in square brackets. It's just a matter of computing the first derivative with respect to the choice variable, the power, and setting to 0. This is the first order condition for the second serve. What about the first serve? In the first serve, the objective function is, first of all, the first part, which is basically the performance in the first serve. But if there is a mistake in the first serve, in square brackets here, you observe the probability of making a mistake in the first serve, then we have the second serve, which is served according to the first order condition. If we compute the first derivative here with respect to P1, the power of the first serve, we get the first order condition for the maximization of the performance in the first serve. And if you solve the system under some regulatory condition, it can be shown that the power in the first serve is larger than the power in the second serve, and the accuracy in the first serve is smaller than the accuracy in the second serve. This is actually what we observe typically in tennis matches. For instance, in Australian Open matches, the first serve passing rate, where you can use the passing rate as a measure of accuracy, is 60%. In the second serve is 90%, so it's higher in the second serve. And the ball speed is, on the other way around, faster on the first serve than in the second serve, like this simple model would predict. In our framework, we don't use power. We don't have a measure of power. We don't have the speed of the ball. We just have a measure for the accuracy. So basically, the capability of sending the first or the second ball on the right service box of the opponent. And accuracy may depend not only on power, but also on individual characteristics or match characteristics, X. It could depend as well on temperature, because, as I said at the beginning, temperature heat may have important consequence from the physical and mental point of view of human body. So accuracy may be directly affected by temperature, but accuracy depends also on power. And also power may be affected by, individual characteristic and match characteristic, but also power may be affected by temperature. What's the marginal effect of temperature? Basically, what we will estimate, the marginal effect of temperature on accuracy. If we take the first derivative, then it's made up of two components. The second one is a direct effect. It's a direct effect coming from directly from temperature on accuracy. And we guess that this effect is negative, because when temperature rises, we may expect that because of cognitive problems and physical problems, coordination problems, accuracy may go down. About the first term here, that's the direct effect of temperature coming from the effect that temperature may have on power. Here, actually, we don't know, because if temperature, for instance, could decrease power, but if power decreases, then accuracy increases. So the net effect of this component could be, for instance, either positive or negative. And at the same time, players may decide to reduce or to increase power when temperature increases, just because of a change of style of play, the game, just maybe we have a shorter rallies and to save energy. So basically, we don't know what's the sign of this indirect term. We may guess that the most important one is the direct effect. And if you think of this direct effect here, you may also get, at least we guess that, we hypothesize that when there is more at stake, like in the second serve, when if you make a mistake, you lose the point, players may be more likely to concentrate more on what they are doing despite higher temperatures, and may, by doing that, offset a bit the negative effect of temperature that they may suffer when temperature is high on accuracy. And so our guess is that the effect of temperature may be stronger at the first serve than what happens in the second serve. So basically, when there is more at stake, they may concentrate much more on what they are doing to offset the negative effect of temperature.
Matteo, I'm just going to interrupt
Yes.
you because Daniele has his hand up with a question.
Yes. Hi, Matteo. So
Hi.
when you're thinking about the effect of temperature on both power and accuracy, you're only thinking about it through how it affects the player's fatigue and sort of his or her ability to concentrate. It's not about anything about the physical features of how temperature affects accuracy. So suppose that there are windy conditions and the temperature is low, that is probably going to affect the accuracy of a tennis serve. And you said something earlier about baseball and air density, and that's something that may affect the flight of tennis balls as well. I would guess that at the professional level, these things could actually be important.
Yes, I mean, you're completely right. It's not just a matter of cognitive elements. It could be also physical problems that you may have when it's quite hot. But also, for instance, if you sweat a lot, it could be also having, sweaty hands on the kind of grip that you have on the racket. There might be, to my opinion, there might be a set of mechanisms that may explain why temperature may have a negative effect on accuracy. Not only the cognitive component, of course, but also the physical one, and also, let's say, the mechanical one through the grip on for instance, on the tennis racket. And of course, there could be also different head density, but consider that if it comes to air density, it's quite different from baseball, because in that case, the distance that the ball runs is quite long, and in that case, maybe having lower density, air density, it's much more important than in tennis, where you have just a few meters between the server and the opponent. So at least that's my feeling.
So the English people in the audience here will probably tell you everything they need to know about cricket and how weather conditions affect the type of bowling strategy, and and I don't really know how that works, but I know that it matters a lot. And those are actually small distances, and so it seems as the flight of the ball probably is affected by the weather conditions.
Yes. I mean, I completely agree. It's also true that here we are not looking at the capability of winning the point on the first serve or on the second serve. We're just looking at the capability of sending the first serve on the opponent's service box without touching the net.
Okay.
So, of course, here air density could play a role on the trajectory. But I mean, it may be a component of what we are looking at. So it could be like an extra explanation, but I don't see very well if that kind of lower air density could be in favor or against the capability of sending the ball in the opponent's service box. I
was thinking about also wind and things, so it's not just air density, like it's all of the physical conditions. Of course, yeah.
Also wind. And as you will see, we'll not be controlling for wind, but in the end, I will present you something about robustness checks where we also use wind speed as a control variable.
Okay.
Did I reply to your question?
Yeah. No, I was just, I think it's something
just a reflection thing
about. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Just to also say at that point, because Daniele, you refer perhaps to Stefan Szymanski, who's given a presentation in this series about the effect of temperature on cricket. So Matteo, I can point you to the title and the date and the YouTube clip if you want it at a later point.
Thank you.
There has been a talk on cricket and temperature in this series, so thank you, Daniele.
Thank you very much. Yes, if you could give me the reference later, would be great. Thank you very much. Cricket. So let's move to our empirical part. As at the beginning, we are looking at men outdoor single matches, ATP Tour 2003-2021. We have about 38,000 of matches. So if we go to a player level observation, this means about 76,000 observations. And we got information about the match and the performance from two different sources. The first one is Tennis Data UK. In particular, from this first data source, we get information about the day of the match, which of course is terribly important in order to relate the day of the match to the particular temperature that players experience during that match on that day. And the second information source comes from GitHub. It's Jeff Saxman's repository, where you have information about the performance, like serve points, number of aces, number of faults, first serve made, that basically we use to build compute our dependent variables. In the second source of information, in this data set, you don't have the day in which the match was played, but you just have the day in which the tournament started. And therefore, we have to match both of them. In matching these two data sources, we lose some observations, but not so many. But basically, we need both of them because of this. In the first one, we have the day of the match. In the second one, you don't. In the first one, you don't have the performance indicators. In the second, you have performance indicators. We got information about temperature from the Copernicus Climate Change Service Program, from which we were able to download hourly information about temperature. And it's quite granular information because we have information grid field of about 9 kilometer square dimension, so 0.1 times 0.1 in terms of latitude, longitude. We don't have information from the two tennis data sets about the hour of the day in which the match was played. So we had to approximate a bit the information about the information. We had to approximate the temperature that players actually experienced, and we decided to use the temperature registered at 3 p.m. in the day of the match. We know that this opens the door to some measurement error, but consider the identification strategies in terms of deviation from the temperature registered during the particular tournament. So this should a little bit remove some measurement error due to the fact we used 3 p.m. for all the matches played on that particular day in that location. And I mean, basically, we chose 3 p.m. because typically matches starts at about 11 noon in the morning when you have the first rounds, and they go on over the afternoon. And so we saw 3 p.m. as a reasonable hour of the day in order to minimize a bit the distance from the actual time in which the game was played, the match was played. And this table shows the some summary statistic about the information that we exploit in the empirical analysis. At the top, you have the uptime variables, the first serve made rate and double fault rate. The first serve made rate is about 61%. So this is the fraction of time professional tennis players are able to correctly send the first serve on the service box of the opponent. And then the double fault rate, which is about 3.8 percentage point. On the bottom panel, panel B, you have the covariance that we use in our model specification. Temperature, of course, 21 degrees on average. Best of 5 set or best of 3 sets. Age, height, left-handedness. Difference in players' ranking, ATP ranking, and that's to measure how much the match was supposed to be balanced between the two players and height because of that. The sum in players' ranking in order to have a measure of the quality of the match. this goes from free, of course, to a big number. It's free when you have basically the number 1 against number 2. So in principle, the highest quality match that you may have. If the player is playing at home or not, playing home basically it means if there is a match between if the nationality of the player is the same as the nationality of the tournament, the country where the tournament is played, the round, the tournament series, the surface, and furthermore, I'm showing you, but we also control for the day of the week and for the quarter of the year in which a tournament is played. This graph displays the raw correlation between performance and temperature. On the horizontal axis, you have temperature in Celsius degrees. And on the vertical axis, you have the performance measure. And you can see that when we move out from a kind of thermal comfort zone, so basically for temperature higher than the 18 Celsius degree, the first serve made rate decreases, and it decreases a lot. It goes from almost 62 to almost 59 percentage points, so 3 percentage point decrease, almost 3 percentage point decrease. And there is an increase, similar increase in double fault rate, which goes from 3.5 to almost 4.5. When I look at these numbers, when we look at these numbers, and since neither Jan nor myself have a large expertise in tennis, so basically we almost know nothing about tennis. We didn't know whether these changes were big or not. So we tried to provide, to give you, and also to give us ourselves an idea of how big that almost 3 percentage point decrease in performance is in the top panel, or the 1 percentage point increase in double fault rate is by looking at how these measures evolve across ATP ranking. So basically across the quality of the players as measured by ATP ranking. As you can see in this graph, the top graph, if you look at this number, 63, basically 63 is the first serve made rate that you typically have for a top 5, top 10 player in the ATP ranking. If you decrease it by almost or about 2.5 percentage points, which is the same kind of the decrease that we have when you move from 20 to 30 degrees, you basically go from top player, from a superstar tennis player, to a normal player. And the same is true if you look at double fault rates. You move from from a superstar player, if you increase it by 1 percentage point, you go to normal players, normal sports professional players. But by looking at this, we realize that maybe this decrease in performance that you see here is quite big, relevant at least for this kind of sport. I don't know whether you agree. If you disagree, tell me. That could be helpful also for us in order to understand if we are not saying something that matches what your experience in tennis. Of course, this is a kind of raw correlation that could be spurious. So next, we try to model tennis performance in order to get rid of spurious components in that relationship and to credibly identify the causal effect of performance, of temperature on performance in tennis. And we control for a set of individual and match characteristics. We include the player fixed effect in this equation, and we include also a tournament edition fixed effect. Here, the functional relationship between temperature and the dependent variable is left unspecified. I'll tell you later something about this, but I would like to give you just a few words about the tournament edition fixed effect, because by controlling for it, we are able to control for features that are unique to tournaments and that may also change over time. Think, for instance, of Australian Open. It's quite unique because it's one of the 4 Grand Slams, one of the 4 most important tournaments that are played by professional tennis players. It's quite unique because of tennis audience, prices, because of the quarter of the year in which it's played, because it's played in January in Australia. In January, it's quite hot. It's characterized by heat waves, much more than other tournaments. And moreover, in Australian Open, you have a neat policy. So some special rules such that if some weather conditions are met, tennis players are allowed to rest a bit in order to allow their bodies to cool down. And these heat policies have changed over time. This kind of tournament edition fixed effect is able to capture this kind of peculiarities that may change over time, and that could be related, of course, to the kind of temperature that are typically experienced at tournament, but also to the performance that typically players are able to exert in that particular tournament. Moreover, when we introduce this tournament edition fixed effect in this regression, it's as if we are removing from each variable the within tournament edition average. If you remove this average from temperature, so basically you're left with the deviation of the temperature experienced in a given match from the average temperature in that particular tournament edition. And that's kind of deviation, which is depicted here for just for 4 tournaments in a given year, just for the sake of simplicity, is the kind of short-term information that allows us to identify the temperature effect. Is this kind of deviation, short-term deviation, that we assume to be exogenous in this setup. Finally, about the functional form, we tried with SP-line continuous function for different interval beams of temperature. We tried with the stepwise specification, so basically interval beams. We tried also with linear specification, and we found that actually the linear specification is fine. What does it mean? Basically, if you just observe what we get if we use interval beams, and we estimate the coefficient associated to each dummy for each interval beams, we get this, what you have in this slide, which looks like a linear relationship between the temperature and performance. In the top graph, you have the effect on the first serve made rate. In the bottom, in the graph at the bottom, you have the impact on double fault rate, and you can see that it's almost linear, and it's also quite big. What does it mean quite big? It means that if you move, for instance, from 20, here the reference category, so basically normalized to 0, is temperature below 14. So if you move from 20 to 26 or 28, you have an increase which is about 1 percentage point. Decrease of 1 percentage point in the first submit rate. In terms of double fault rate, if you move from 20 to 26 or 28, you get an increase by about 0.4 percentage points in the double fault rate. These are big, especially if we, as I did before, we compare it to what you observe in terms of evolution of the first serve made rate or the double fault rate across ATP ranking. These graphs come from a regression in which I just regress ATP ranking, divided in different beams, on the performance indicators and player fixed effect. And here the normalization is for top 10 players, top 10 in the ATP ranking, which is normalized to 0. And if you move, and here you can see that if you move from top 10 players to 50 or 60 or 70 in the ATP ranking, you get a decrease by 1 percentage point in terms of first serve made rate, which is about what you observe here if you move from 20 to 26 or 28. So once again, this kind of decrease in performance that we observe because of temperature is the kind of gap or decrease in performance that you observe when you move from top 10 players, so basically superstar, to normal players. That's why we say that it's big. And you get similar evidence if you regress the performance variable on the tournament round. And you basically, if you are in a final or a semi-final, you have the same kind of performance decrease with respect to the first round as the one that you have if you move from 20 to 26 or 28 Celsius degrees. So once again, this kind of decrease is quite big because it's the same kind of decrease in quality that you have when you move from a final or a semi-final to a first round of a tournament. If we impose linearity, that's what we get. We get that 1 more Celsius degree decrease the first serve made rate by 0.11 percentage points, and increase the double fault rate by 0.04 percentage points. If you increase temperatures by 10 Celsius degree, you have a decrease by 1.1 percentage points in terms of first serve made rate, an increase by 0.4 percentage points in double fault rate, and finally, if we rephrase the double fault rate measured as a second serve made rate, so basically the fraction of time when the server is serving the second ball is able to correctly send the ball in the cervix box of the opponent, then the decrease is of about 0.7 percentage points, which is smaller than the decrease that we have in the first serve made rate, which support our assumption, our hypothesis that the temperature gradient is bigger when there is less at stake and is smaller when there is more at stake, like in the second serve. Because in the second serve, if you make a mistake, you lose the point. We run a set of sensitivity analysis. We try to see what happens if we remove the player fix effect, nothing changes. We try to see what happens if we use matches played indoors, and we find that indoor performance is not affected by temperature. That's quite reasonable because tennis players, for instance, typically sleep or they stay in luxury hotels where they have air conditioning overnight, so their sleep quality shouldn't be so affected by heat waves, for instance. We try with the logarithm of the dependent variables so that we get an estimate of semi-elasticity of the effect, and we find from the qualitative point of view the same results. We also try to split the sample in 2 parts, before and after the introduction of the OK technology, just to check if maybe something changed, because maybe also the performance of the chair umpire depends on temperature, and maybe that's affected systematically in one direction, and we actually find that the results are really the same before and after the introduction of the OK technology. And this is something that I did last week. So this is something that you cannot find in the discussion paper that we published at the beginning of September. I downloaded data about air quality, so containing wind speed and air pollution measures like particulate matter 2.5 and ozone. And we control for it. And we basically find the same results. So, of course, wind speed matters in terms of performance. Air pollution matters, and actually the higher air pollution, the lower tennis performance. But the introduction of these further variables do not affect our main results, which are really, really the same. And finally, when I downloaded this further information last week, I also downloaded the dew point temperature that can be used in order to compute a humidity index, so an index that is able to take into account not only of temperature, but also on the humidity level of the air, which is important to cool down human body. And we found that basically, if we replace temperature with a humidity index, we get the same results. So basically, it doesn't matter so much whether you use temperature or you use, let's say, a bit more complex index that encompasses also a measure for the humidity of the air. Heterogeneity. We dig into this issue in order to understand if the temperature gradient may be different because of different individual characteristics or nature characteristics. And we actually found, as I anticipated before, that when players play on clay, the temperature effect is stronger in terms of double faults. This graph summarizes a bit the temperature effect heterogeneity when it comes to double fault rate. Here you have the Bayesian effect, and here you have the effect on clay and the effect on grass or hard cores. And you can see that the difference is quite important. It's important also from the statistical point of view. And it suggests that actually on clay, so basically when typically players have to exert more energy and it's more also energy consuming to play on clay, then temperature has a stronger effect. We see something like that also in terms of first serve. So the performance is more negatively affected, but this difference is not statistically different from zero, although it's there. We found that there is no difference between Grand Slam and non-Grand Slam matches. And basically, the idea here is to see whether when there is more at stake in terms of price or the importance of the tournament, there may be differential effects. But consider that this kind of exercise is also capturing something different. Grand Slam matches are typically played on the best of 5 sets. Non-Grand Slam matches are played at the best of 3 sets. And there is almost a perfect overlap between Grand Slam and non-Grand Slam and the best of 5 sets and best of 3 sets. Almost perfect because as far as I know, as far as I remember, when in non-Grand Slam matches, they never play on 5 sets apart from some finals of Master 1000 tournaments. And maybe that happened only up to 2006 and 2007, if I remember well. So in our data set I checked, there is almost a perfect overlap. So basically here, when we run this kind of exercise, we're not only discussing about when there is more at stake, but actually also when the match is supposed to be longer lasting. So also more energy consuming. And if it's more energy consuming, like in Grand Slam, you may expect a stronger temperature effect. So these maybe can offset the fact that here there is a more stake. When the round, we found that the temperature gradient is smaller in quarterfinals or later. So here we find that when there is more at stake, in terms of first serve at least, when there is more at stake, the effect is smaller. Graphically, you can see it here. This before quarterfinals, after quarterfinals or later, and you can see that the negative effect on the first serve made rate is more important when there is less at stake, less important when there is more at stake, closer to zero when there is more at stake. Still there, still significantly different from zero, but less important. We also find that better players are more able to cope with higher temperature in terms of first serve. So here, top 50 in the ATP ranking and no in the top 50 in the ATP ranking, and this difference is significantly different from zero. Older players are affected by larger effects. So basically, they suffer more higher temperatures. And you can see here, we split the population in 3 groups. These are roughly basically 3. We basically split the population in 3 equal sized groups. And we find that basically the older they get, the more important the temperature effect. This is also true for double fault rate, but this is not significantly different from zero. Only the first serve made rate is, at least from the statistical point of view, significantly different from zero. These 3 effects are statistically significantly different from zero. We also look at the difference in ATP ranking. So basically, if the effect is different when the match is more balanced, but actually we found that there is no difference at all. And we also look at home advantage, and there is no differential effect depending on whether the player nationality is the same as the country where the game is played. Next exercise about accumulation or and adaptation. We try to understand whether maybe tennis players get adapted to high temperatures. And in order to do that, we took the initial equation, the Bayesian equation, the Bayesian model, and we plug in this further control variable, which is the temperature experienced by the player in the previous match of the same tournament edition. When we do that, we lose a lot of observations. We lose 1/2 of the observations, and we focus, therefore, on players that were able to win the first round. This is quite demanding in terms of number of observations. We also tried with the leg of order 2, but then the number of the observation shrinks even more, and we found that the leg of order 2 doesn't matter, but it also may be to the fact that the statistical power of the exercise gets reduced a lot. But in this kind of equation, alpha 0 is the temperature effect of the current match on the current performance. The alpha 1 is instead the effect of temperature experienced by the player in the previous match on the performance in the current match. And we find that 1 more Celsius degree in the previous match is able to push down the negative effect coming from 1 extra Celsius degree in the current match. So basically, the effect of 1 more Celsius degree, both in the current match and in the previous match, is given by the sum of these two coefficients, alpha 0 and alpha 1, and it's smaller than the current effect. So we interpret these findings, which is there both for the first serve made rate and on double fault rate. We interpret this finding as an evidence of a short-term adaptation. So if you suffer 1 more Celsius degree in the previous match, then this compensates a bit the higher temperature on the current match. Finally, we try to provide some evidence about a long-run relation between temperature and performance, because what we've done so far can only be interpreted in terms of short-term effect. It's a short-term shock in temperature with respect to the mean experienced during that particular tournament edition on performance. Therefore, we cannot say anything so far about long-run relationships between temperature and performance. But if we observe what we have in the data, we realize that across years, the temperature experienced by tennis players have increased, especially in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, there has been a surge in temperatures, as you can see in this cloud of points in this graph, which basically plots years against the average temperature experience in each year by professional tennis players. And so what we did is, basically, we estimated the Bayesian equation. We computed, we estimated the tournament edition fixed effect, which is a residual measure of performance at tournament edition level. And then we took that measure, that estimated tournament edition fixed effect, and we regressed it on the average temperature at tournament edition level, controlling also for year fixed effects and tournament fixed effects. And we get that, and we obtain that there is no long-run relationship between the first serve made rate, as measured by this estimated tournament fixed effect, and the average temperature. There is a positive effect of average temperature on the double fault rate. So there is some kind of long-run evidence that if temperature on average increases in the tournament, then double fault rate increases as well. So basically, a decrease in performance. So I get close to the end. And here I just summarize a little bit our main findings. We found that in tennis, temperature decreases performance, at least as measured by the first serve mate rate and double fault rate. We found that indoors, there is no effect of temperatures. And when we look at the heterogeneity of the effect, we found that older players have more, better players, in terms of ATP ranking, suffer less. And when there is more stakes, the temperature gradient is smaller. So basically, when there is more stakes, it seems that players are more able to cope with higher temperature than otherwise. We also find some evidence for suggesting a short-term adaptation of players for high temperatures. And finally, we also find, at least in terms of double fault rate, some evidence for long-term negative temperature effects. And finally, and maybe the most important slide here, external validity. We use sport data, of course, a natural question about the capability of generalized findings arises. And here we try to argue something about the external validity of our findings, also to have a kind of to suggest something at least in labor economics more widely. Professional tennis is, of course, a particular sport characterized by a combination of intense physical activity and mental focus and accuracy. To some extent, you can find this kind of combination in some job tasks, for instance, in agriculture and construction. They are forced most of the time, of course, to work outdoors. And they also have workers in this kind of job task are also forced to have kind of intense physical activities relative, of course, to the kind of training that they can have. And they also have to accept some kind of accuracy when they perform their job activities. For instance, in performing some kind of handicraft tasks. And you have this kind of setup, a situation also sometimes in manufacturing whenever climate control is not possible because maybe it's too costly or difficult technological to implement. Moreover, there are some high-stake environments that requires some kind of physical or intense physical activity and quite a lot of accuracy and focused decision making. Things of army special forces, firefighters, emergency doctors, professional musicians, but also dancer or performance where they perform, they play or they dance outdoors, for instance, when this typically happens in summer. In Italy, it happens very often in summer in historical arenas like Arena of Verona. And so also this kind of jobs and professions could be affected as well by temperature, as well as tennis players are. Of course, we can say nothing about the size of the effect, but I would guess that qualitatively, from the qualitative point of view, you may expect also in this kind of job task and professions, similar performance effects coming from high temperatures. And that's it from my side. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Matteo. I am going to give you a team's round of applause. That was a really very interesting talk on the impact of warm weather, hot weather on performance. Pete already has his hand up, so we'll pass over to Pete for the first question.
First of all, I really enjoyed the talk. I think it's a very interesting question, and I do agree that sports is a labor, well, in this case, a labor market laboratory for the other things. And so I think it is meaningful to labor economists in general. Early in your talk, you talked about how you were really worried about individual performance and not joint performance. I think that another paper would look at the joint performance, such as aces, durations, volleys. I know the performance is affected by both, but it'd be interesting to know if weather affects those as well. And then I guess being a labor economist, I was wondering if you thought about maybe using temperature squared to kind of get a convex or concave relationship. It looked like it was linear, but I was just curious if you had tested that.
Sorry, if I tested that on what?
Just to see if, well, a lot of times you think the weather gets hotter and hotter. It's a bigger effect when it's even hotter than lower. But it did look like mostly when you looked at it, it was linear in nature. But I was just curious if you tried to see if there was a concave or convex effect.
No, I mean, we didn't try to see if there is a concave or convex effect. I mean, mostly because we grouped, let me share once again my screen. We group basically intervals such that basically you have one big intervals below 14. But there are not so many tennis matches that are played
I see.
below this temperature. So basically that's why we grouped everything together here. So I don't know what would happen if I had more information in order to identify also the profile of this functional form here. If we go to the raw correlation, you can see that our observation started about 9 Celsius degrees. Of course, here you can imagine that you can see that there is a negative effect of temperature as well here when it becomes quite cold. But we didn't dig too much into the issue because we were more interested in selling the paper like climate change and this kind of stuff. But you're right, maybe we should put some extra effort in order to try to identify the profile of the functional form also in this area here. But we didn't do it in our regression model. We just have some hint from this slide. It seems that actually it's a bit concave. Concave, I mean, if you look at the portrait, or convex if you look at the 180 beams, so it depends on what you look at, but it's like U-shaped or inverted U-shaped.
Yeah. And then this, I don't know if you have this information, but usually I was wondering if you have when the defaults in the aces occurred, early in the match or late in the match. Maybe it's not available to you, but it'd be very interesting if you could find that. Yeah,
I know that would be extremely interesting. It's not available in the dataset that we have because it's quite simple dataset in which we have just aggregate statistics of the whole match. That's a suggestion that I already received last time I presented it. I suppose that it's not so easy to find that kind of data. I have no idea how to find them, basically. I know that basically that's not maybe a nice answer, but...
No, we're always looking for the ideal data set, but you do what you can do.
Yeah. I've been suggested just to look maybe at some tournaments, maybe just look at some Grand Slams and try to manually get the data. I looked at it, but I said maybe the cost benefit, according to the cost benefit principle, I realized that maybe it's something that I will not do unless I find some web scraping technique in order to do that. That's the point. But so far, I haven't been able to find a way in order to download that kind of information. But I agree with you, that would be terribly interesting in order to see whether at the beginning of the match or later in the match. I would expect that later in the match the temperature effect is stronger.
Yeah, me too.
That's my guess, but that's not so easy.
Well, thank you.
Great, thanks, Pete. We've got Daniele next.
Yeah, really, very, very interesting. I may have missed this, but did you say anything about the duration of rallies?
No, I mean, we don't have information about duration of rallies, so we didn't dig into that kind of issue. We have information about duration of the match in minutes.
Okay, yeah.
But we decided not to use it as a control variable because, of course, that's a bad control variable because the duration is affected by how many mistakes they make in the first and the second.
Outcome variable.
As an outcome variable, we have results, and I can say that there is no effect of temperature on duration. That's also an effect that is found by Bark and et al. Here.
And
there is no effect on match duration. That's also what we have, but we didn't put this result in the paper. We had it at the very beginning in the appendix, but then we decided to shorten the paper and remove it.
Okay.
But That's it.
Sorry,
No
this
motivation.
is, but you do observe the total number of points played. So this is match duration
Yes.
in minutes. But you, I'd be curious about sort of, match duration per point played.
We don't have the match duration per point played. We have the total points played and match duration. That's it.
Right. So you could calculate the average duration of a point.
Yes. That's something that's possible to do.
Because I think that, I mean, what I'm wondering, like, this negative slope that you find on the first serves, one possible interpretation is that it's not a performance effect, but it's a strategic choice. It's very hot. I'm going to shorten the rallies. I'm going to try to hit more powerful serves, and I'm going to make more mistakes.
Yes, it may be that kind of strategic. It could be the result of the strategic behavior. I agree with you. Nonetheless, I suppose that if you end up with this kind of outcome, the probability of winning will, my guess at least, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know tennis so much, but the probability of winning should go down. Because I suppose that if you lose more points because of a double fault, even if it's a result of a strategic behavior, you should be decreasing the probability of winning the game and winning the match. Also, because of the importance of the first serve in tennis, especially in tennis,
do you observe
male tennis,
yeah,
I would expect that if this first serve made rate goes down, even if it's because of strategic behavior to save energies, then you are less performant. I mean, your creativity is going down.
Almost surely you have the percentage of points won on first serve. That's typically reported in all the tennis things.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So,
I can
if your theory, if it's really performance, the percentage of points won on first serve should also decline with temperature. Whereas if this is a strategic response, maybe it's flat, right? Because I'm really trying to go for the. I mean, you did say something about aces, which now I forgot what the result was on aces.
But I suppose that the probability of serving of winning the point, that kind of point depends also on the opponent then.
Well, right, but
and also how the temperature
right?
affect the opponent.
Right, but but if you're hitting a very powerful and you're really trying to win the point on the first serve because you want to shorten the rally, right? Then perhaps the first serve percentage goes down, but the percentage of points won on first serve remains, maybe even goes up.
Yeah, it could go up.
Yeah.
It depends on the performance of the opponent. If the opponent, for instance, because of high temperature, is very slow in reacting.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree that it would be extremely interesting to look at the change of the behavioral change of tennis players because of temperature. But then I think that I need much more detailed information, different kind of data source, so that I cannot do it with the kind of data that we have now, as I was saying before.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Daniele. Any more questions and comments? Do you have information on the altitude that these matches took place at, Matteo?
I don't. I mean, I don't have it right now, but it's not so difficult to get it.
So I think that's been shown, hasn't it, in a few studies to have an impact on.
So what's the main hypothesis that basically the temperature effect could be different according to the altitude of the match? Because as a control variables, I cannot use it because I already have the tournament edition fixed effect and the altitude is fixed per each tournament. So as a control variable, it is not useful. It could be useful for heterogeneous effect, but why is that? I mean, I cannot see why altitude should matter in order to.
Yeah, there's some impact
different effects.
There isn't there, because obviously these long distance runners go to high altitude places to do their training. But I don't know, it's just a casual thought.
Well, it may be that the higher the altitude, the smaller the oxygen in the air. So it may be that the temperature effect becomes more important.
Possibly.
Maybe, yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions and comments? Okay, well, thank you very much, Matteo. Really
thank you very much, everybody.
Talk, very comprehensive presentation, really interesting, significant, sizable effects of the temperature, and obviously look forward to seeing how you progress with your work. So thanks, Jan, thanks, Matteo, thanks everyone for your contributions. We will be back again next week. Next week we're going to have a hybrid talk, because we will have Alex Trumer, ordinarily of Molde University College. He will be in Reading next week, and so we will be online, but we will also be physically in person in Reading. Alex is going to talk about, well, his title is On the Cost of Wearing White Shorts in Women's Sport. So do join us again next week, and in the meantime, do have a great weekend. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.